Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Great America Show. I'm John Fawcett, in for Lou Dobbs. Well, Americans are becoming increasingly discouraged with sending their kids to college and schools around America, whether it be higher education or grade school, and people are moving more towards homeschooling their children. A new poll out today finds that only 36% of Americans have confidence in higher education in America. To take all this up, I want to bring in Professor Nick Giordano, Professor of Political Science and host of the PAS Report. Nick, great to have you on the program.
Thanks, Sean. Pleasure to be with you.
So what do you make of this? 36% of Americans have confidence in higher educations. It's down 21 points from 2015. What do you make of that?
Well, it doesn't shock me at all. At Campus Reform, we've actually been reporting on this story because it's a big deal. When you have the majority of Americans losing faith in their higher education institutions, something is fundamentally broken within the system. And when it comes to colleges, there are a number of reasons that we're witnessing this. First is that students are paying an enormous amount of tuition. They're graduating with this huge student debt burden. And then they go to get a job, but they can't find the job because many of them got a useless degree, or just businesses aren't hiring those with college degrees anymore. There have been a number of businesses, both large corporations like Google, IBM, and Tesla, as well as small businesses, that have done away with four-year degree requirements because they don't like the caliber of students that these colleges are graduating. Only 37% of college graduates understand critical thinking, have the ability to solve problems. They have difficulty interacting with coworkers. And so we've seen businesses move away. When you look at the parents and the students themselves, they don't want to be caught in the student debt bubble, and they don't want to be indoctrinated, right? We see the left-wing indoctrination taking place on college campuses, the diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and degree requirements that have been pushed into the system, and students are being forced. So students are now withdrawing from the system because they don't want the far-left ideology being pushed on them. And then it comes down to, you have a lot of students that are looking at the trades. You know, coronavirus and the lockdown, students did not want to go remotely to college, and they wanted to start their lives. So they decided, let me go into a trade. It'll only take me 3 months to maybe 2 years. I won't have this huge student debt burden. And once I get my trade certificate, I'll be making a very good living. I'll have a better quality of life without the debt burden. So it's a number of factors. It's a reckoning within the higher education that we're witnessing. And the anti-Semitic, anti-American mobs that we've seen over the last several months on college campuses have made the situation that much worse.
You know, a big thing that Lou pushes here on this program is he encourages parents to send their kids, if they don't know what they want to do right away, or, you know, they're confused or whatever, he encourages them, send them to community college. It's the best bang for your buck. And that's what you teach at. Have you seen any sort of change in enrollment or anything like that over the last five or so years that we've seen, you know, DEI pushed across college campuses? You've seen these pro-Palestinian, massive, we call them rallies on their college campuses. You know, have you seen any sort of enrollment change in your school or, you know, anything that's changed since we've seen, you know, this uproar along, these higher education and Ivy League schools around America?
Well, all colleges, many of them throughout the country, including community colleges, have faced enrollment declines. And a large part of it is due simply because America is an aging society. There are less students to pull from. And so we've seen a decline. Then after COVID, we saw a significant decline during the COVID years because nobody wants to spend money to learn through Zoom. It simply doesn't work. It's not effective, and it's largely useless. And every school faces some type of enrollment declines, particularly amongst males, because they're going into the trades. But we are seeing a slowdown now. And in fact, we are witnessing growth. Enrollment's picking up slightly. And when it comes to community colleges, you don't see the ideological intolerance that you see on the four-year university campuses. The makeup of a community college is completely different. The student body, you have students that can't afford to go to the four-year schools. You have students that may have children and they're taking care of their family. You have students that work full-time or are trying to get their grades up so maybe that they could get a scholarship and transfer. So they take their studies much more seriously. And that's why they don't bring ideology into it. They're too busy dealing with the real world, where many of the university campuses, you have that groupthink mentality because they all come from that middle to upper middle class background. And they end up getting this elitist attitude towards all the issues. And that's where they become activists. So at Campus Reform, we've explained how community colleges are a viable alternative to the four-year system. It makes much more sense. And you save yourself about 90% of the tuition dollars. There are still companies that, while they may have dropped the four-year degree requirements, they're still requiring 60 credits of a college education. We also see that a lot with civil service positions at the state and local level. So you're still going to need some type of college. And why should you spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars when you could only have to spend several grand a semester, $2,500 to $3,000 per semester? It just makes financial sense.
To me, it sounds like a bang for your buck. Just you mentioned the upper echelons of these people who are pushing this DEI and all this nonsense on college campuses. I want to play for the audience. This is Becky Pringle. She's the president of the National Education Association. Speaking at a keynote speech, I want to play for the audience and get your reaction to this on just how unhinged these people are who are running the show, who are calling the shots. Take a listen.
During every moment of change or perceived chaos, we will remember who we are. We are the ones who helped to shape the heart of this nation's hopes and dreams. We are the ones who hold steadfast to the belief of the plausibility of the possible. We are the heirs of all who did this work before us. We must keep going. NEA delegates, we can do this work. We must do this work. We get to do this work. We will do this work because our students are depending on us to win all the things. NEA, we have to win all the things. All the things. All the things. Our colleagues are depending on us to win all the things. Keep going, NEA. To preserve our democracy, we must win all the things. Delegates, we won't go back. We will keep going forward because we are the NEA. We are the NEA. We are the NEA. And that's what we do. Thank you, NEA.
That's Becky Pringle, the president of the NEA, if you missed that, at a keynote speech in Philadelphia.
Well, you want to talk about an unhinged rant. I mean, there you go. These people, these are the people that are making education policy. They have an enormous amount of influence over education policy. And I find it truly remarkable because when we look at the evidence, they've done more to harm student education than anyone. I mean, you look at the Randy Weingartens, another teachers union president, they were directly responsible for keeping schools closed in the most vulnerable communities for 2 years. We now see the lowest proficiency levels in our history. And I find it amazing that when she starts screaming about saving democracy, I just wrote a piece for Campus Reform in the Washington Examiner where students don't understand the fundamental civics. They don't understand our Constitution, how our government works, why it was created in the first place. And I explain that we are not teaching American civics anymore.
We're going to take a quick break here. And we're going to pick up on that when we return here. We're talking with Professor Nick Giordano. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. We're talking with Professor Nick Giordano and host of the PAS Report. So right before we went to break, Nick, I mean, we heard that piece from Becky Pringle, and it's just astonishing that these are the people that are running our education system. You said Randy Weingartner, and you'd mentioned your piece in the Washington Examiner this week, bringing civics back to the classroom. Tell us a little bit about it and why it's so important for our future of our education system and the future of our children.
Well, I give my students a citizenship exam every single semester, the first day. And the fact is only 6% of my students could pass that. And it's a very basic exam, asks simple questions. When you look at the broader statistics, only 25% of Americans can name the 5 freedoms guaranteed in the First Amendment. Most Americans have no idea what their rights are within our society, nor do they know what their responsibilities are. So I explained how civics is the key forward. If we look at how radicalized people have become, how ideological, it's because civics has been replaced decades ago with activism. Activism doesn't mean that you're teaching about the United States government. Activism means that you're pushing a political agenda. And that's the fraud that's taking place amongst the student body. Only 13% of students today are proficient in American history. Only 22% are proficient in civics, American government. And we need to change that, because if we want to have a vibrant republic, well, students need to know what their roles and responsibilities are within the system, because it's not just about what our government exists and what it's meant for. It's also meant to tell us what's our role in the system. What are our obligations? To work hard, to take care of our families, not to seek government for assistance, but to solve problems ourselves through the communities, as opposed to laying everything on the foundation of the federal government. And I think that that's something that's missing. We've seen government dependency expand. We've seen the sense of entitlement expand, and it's because people don't know the proper role of government.
So let me ask you this. Are we past the point, in your opinion, of no return? I mean, how do we come back from this? How do we come back from, like I said earlier, the teaching of sexuality in the classroom to minors who don't really know anything at this point in their life? Do we ever come back from the DEI and all this racial garbage that these people are pushing in these classrooms to these kids? Do we come back from it? And if so, how?
Well, if we want to survive as a nation, we better come back from it. That's the truth, because what DEI has done, it's tribalized society. It's broken members down into groups and then pitted these groups against each other of oppressors versus the oppressed. And they're the ones that will determine what are the privileged classes, the white Europeans, certain Asians who will be excluded from schools because they perform too well. Jewish students now have privilege versus those that are oppressed. And then when these groups pit against each other, there has never been a successful tribal society. The way we take it back is for conservatives not to disengage and remove individuals from the school, but to get more active within the school system. That means not only taking over school boards, but it also means that conservatives go into civic life. They go into public life. They get jobs at the state departments of education. They become the teachers. That's the way you take it back. It's not a quick process. It took time to get to this point. It will take time to reverse it, but we have to rewrite the curriculums. We have to have an America-centric curriculum, one where students gain an appreciation for the United States of America, not chant death to America as we've been hearing.
I mean, the kingpin and leader of all this is obviously Joe Biden and the Biden administration. I mean, do you agree?
Well, I think it's the teachers union. I do think it's the politicians, the political elites that have controlled the system of education for decades. I think that there are so many factors at play here that have gotten us to the situation. And listen, I'm a parent, and parents are partly responsible as well because they disengage from the education process. If you used to have about 5 people show up to a school board meeting, that would be a lot. Now, parents are starting to re-engage in the system. You're seeing groups like Moms for Liberty. You see organizations like Campus Reform trying to take education back. But we all have a role to play within the system, because when our education system fails, the decline in our education system, notice how it directly correlates with the decline of our nation as a whole, and our nation getting weaker as a whole.
So what can parents do? I mean, how do we get rid of the Randy Weingartners of the world? How do we get rid of the Becky Pringles? What can parents at home who are listening to you and watching you right now, what can they do to stop this madness? We see parents going to, you could say, school board meetings, right? But look what's happened to these people who go to school board meetings. They get targeted by the Biden DOJ, the Biden regime DOJ, and these people now are all of a sudden labeled domestic terrorists. I mean, it's the same thing we saw with January 6th. What can we do as voters? What can parents at home do? How do we get rid of these tyrants who are ruining our children and ruining society?
Well, I think when it comes to the parent perspective, it's pretty simple. Just follow the Governor Glenn Youngkin roadmap, right? I mean, you had Terry McAuliffe state that parents don't have a say in education. Well, parents made sure that their voice was heard in that election. And so parents have to do their civic responsibility and go to the school board meetings, complain when they don't like what's being taught to the students, stand up for their children, protect their children, and speak out, and also speak to the politicians, the elected officials, and the state departments of education. At the same time, teachers play a role too. Okay, let's be honest here. The teachers are the ones that actually vote for the union presidents. Now, I speak to teachers from all over the country that will reach out to me, and they are very dissatisfied with the union leadership. They need to start attending the meetings, and they need to vote out the delegates, the representatives, the union reps that are pushing a far left ideology. We got to get back the unions to where they used to be, where it was about wages, salaries, and benefits, as opposed to corrupting children with a far left political agenda.
We're going to take a quick break here. We're talking with Professor Nick Giordano. When we return, we're going to talk to Nick about what illegal immigration is doing, what all these illegals pouring into our country are doing to the education system, and what it means for your children. Stay with us. We're coming right back.
Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
We're back. Thanks for staying with us. We're talking with Professor Nick Giordano. And before we went to break there, we were talking about the effects of illegal immigration on our schooling system. You know, some estimates put it at near 20 million illegals are in this country right now. Nick, what is it doing to the schooling system? What is it doing for these children, these American citizens who are going to public schools, and the parents who are sending their children to public schools to get an education, and we're just being overflowed by illegal aliens? What is it doing to the children? What is your estimated numbers on how many of these kids are infiltrating our system across the country?
Well, it's done enormous harm to first of all, our education system, as we've explained, has already failed. It's been failing. Proficiency levels are at all-time lows. And then you have the open border crisis. And President Biden has allowed millions of unaccompanied minors and family units to come to the United States. Now, we are a humane nation. If there are children in our country, we do provide an education because we don't want them on the streets. But it's not easy to do. So take in my area, New York City, 30,000 new students enrolled in just one academic year. And these were students that came illegally across the border. You cannot introduce 30,000 new students in a year and expect that it's not going to have an impact on the quality of education. So the quality of education has declined dramatically. You have a lot of non-English speaking people in the classrooms now, and there's a lot of problems, and it's extremely expensive. In New York City, it costs $38,000 per year to educate a student. So looking at 30,000 students, that's over $1 billion a year in American taxpayer monies. We're seeing the same thing in city after city. In Denver, over 300 students from unaccompanied minors from other countries enrolling in a week, every week. This is overburdening an already failed system, so it's only going to get worse. And that's part of the problem. We need standards in place. And the reality is that a nation exists to take care of the citizens of that country first before it takes care of anywhere else. And the education system has been derelict in its duty, and it can't do it until the policy actually changes.
And there's nobody to blame other than President Joe Biden. Let's turn to Joe Biden. He's having a rough 2 weeks after that debate with President Trump where he got a real eye-opener to where he stands, and he's got his own Democratic Party now turning against him. I want to play for the audience a clip of President Biden this week on Morning Joe. Just take a listen to how angry this man is. the interview was early in the morning, so he was awake, I guess, for his 4 or 5 hours a day that he's allegedly cognitive. But I want to play for the audience and get your reaction to it. This is Joe Biden responding to the elites calling for him to drop out of the presidential race.
The American public is not going to move away from me as an average voter. And again, I'm here for 2 reasons, pal. One, to rebuild the economy for hardworking middle-class people, give everybody a shot. Just a straight shot. Everybody gets a fair chance. Number one. Number two, remember all this talk about how I don't have the black support? Come on, give me a break. Come with me. Watch. I'm getting so frustrated by the elites. Now, I'm not talking about you guys, but about the elites in the party who they know so much more. But if any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
Well, first of all, I mean, I think, I don't know if Joe Biden realized, but the primary process is over. But he mentions his fair chance. He mentions fair chance for the American people. I'll tell you who hasn't gotten a fair chance over these last 3.5 years, and that is the American people, the African American, the Hispanic American, the Caucasian American, the Asian American. Every single person, every walk of life in this country right now has been hurt by this man, whether it be inflation, whether it be illegal immigration. Everyone is being killed by this man. What is he talking about?
Well, speaking as a political scientist, I don't think that calling into news programs without video is really helping his case, right? A lot of people are questioning the president's cognitive abilities, and so this isn't really helpful when he's not doing live appearances. But more importantly, I think what we're witnessing is a civil war in the Democrat Party. I mean, it's clear as day. There are those that believe that the current president of the United States is incapable of running for office, and therefore he should announce that he's not going to run and pass the baton. There are others who believe that the Democrat primary voters came out and voted and that President Biden should remain at the top of the ticket. What this is all leading to is it's reminiscent of 1980 when you had the contested convention in the Democrat Party, where Ted Kennedy was not satisfied with the leadership of Jimmy Carter and challenged Jimmy Carter. Where this all ends, I think it's really hard to predict. You know, there are some that say that only Biden could decide to leave the race. But if you know the history of the United States, you know that the party bosses have an enormous amount of influence. And so do Democrat donors, the people with the money. And it's interesting, from the party that constantly screams about threats to democracy, well, many of these people are saying that the president must stand down in re-election and they should select the candidate of who's going to represent the Democrat Party. So it's a mess for Democrats all across the board. And I don't think that they really know which direction they want to take at this point.
You know, you said threat to democracy. And about 2 weeks ago after the debate, Morning Joe, who you just heard there, Morning Joe, the host.
Best Biden ever.
He says that in order to save democracy, we have to get rid of Biden. But you didn't hear him saying anything to Joe Biden there. It was like he's a TV gangster or something. But speaking of Joe Biden staying in the race, we learned this weekend that a Parkinson's disease expert visited the White House 8 times in 8 months. Now, you want to talk about transparency. You heard the Democrats when President Trump was in there talking about the 25th Amendment, right? They wanted to get rid of Trump because they couldn't impeach him. They impeached him twice. They couldn't get rid of him. I should say they couldn't remove him from office after impeaching him 2 times. But you have a Parkinson's disease expert visiting the White House 8 times, and then reportedly one time for about 7 hours until midnight with White House doctor Kevin O'Connor. I mean, I don't know how we're not hearing it from the mainstream media, even from the Republicans. I mean, they're doing their same old song and a dance, but I mean, if this was President Trump, there would be outrage. This man's unfit for. He'd probably be impeached the next day, or removed under the 25th Amendment. What are the Republicans doing? The double standard here and fighting within the party is just absurd.
Well, the Republicans can't do much. They were talking about passing a resolution about the 25th Amendment, but the 25th Amendment is an executive function, and you can't impeach a president simply because cognitively they have declined and are incapable of doing the job. I find it interesting that people are saying that President Biden isn't fit to run a campaign, and yet they're not stating, well, then is he fit to run the United States of America? That doesn't really make sense. So there are a lot of questions here, and I think that this deserves an investigation because, let's face it, This may be the largest conspiracy in the history of the United States, the biggest scandal that the United States has ever witnessed, that they try to shield the cognitive decline of a president and a democratically elected president. Well, who was making the decisions? What unelected bureaucrats were making the decisions? And so it raises so many questions from the party that constantly speaks about threats to democracy. Well, where is our say in this? And how does it help our republic when you have bureaucrats, the media, and the Democrat Party trying to shield the condition of a president from the American people? It really speaks volumes. I think that this is just the beginning. And I think that there are serious questions already. I think the media should be ashamed of themselves because they are culpable in this. They knew everything that was going on, yet they continued to push the narrative that everything was fine. And we all saw it on television ourselves whenever he spoke, but so many chose to ignore it. Well, now it's here. And the real thing that bothers me the most is it puts us all at risk. It puts our national security at risk, and it's the American people that will bear the brunt of this conspiracy that took place.
Right. You said threat to democracy. Coming out this week, the House Republicans, Chip Roy and 104 co-sponsors introducing H.R. 8281, the Safeguard America Voter Eligibility Act, also known as the SAVE Act, which would make it illegal and try to prevent these illegals from voting in our election. President Biden putting a letter out, which he probably didn't write, from the White House saying, quote, "This bill would do nothing to safeguard our elections, but it would make it much harder for eligible Americans to register and vote and increase the risk of eligible voters being purged from the voter rolls." It's just funny to see, as we're now just a few months from the election, the Biden administration doing all they could to save the administration that's really in trouble, even if it means having dead people vote and illegals vote.
It's really an extraordinary story. When we look at our election system, Britain just had an election and they were able to figure out who won the election on the day of the election. You have France that just held an election. And again, you were able to figure out who won on the day of elections. The United States, our election system has become a mess. And it's because of electronic voting systems. It's because there are too many people behind the scenes that are trying to destabilize the system. And we're seeing it. I mean, this is a no-brainer. This is something where the most important privilege a citizen of a country has is to determine who their elected officials are in the ballots, on the ballot box. And that's the most important function as a citizen. But what they're saying is, well, the citizens' rights don't matter because we don't really have that secure of elections. The idea that Americans don't have identification cards, I mean, if you want to do anything in this country over the age of 18, if you want to go into a liquor store, if you want to buy Sudafed over the counter, if you want to take a flight somewhere, if you want to enter any government building, if you need access to any government benefit, you need a government ID. The idea that people cannot get identification cards is completely ridiculous because everyone has one already. And so I don't understand the logic. I mean, I do understand the logic. It's speculation, but it shows that people don't really care about our voting system and making our voting system safe and secure. Because if they did, there are very simple things that we could do that don't cost taxpayers a dime and would make the voting process a lot simpler and a lot more efficient. And guess what? Everyone would be able to respect the results when they came out.
I think Americans know why the Democrats aren't in favor of this. There's only one group of people in this country, we could say, who are in favor of insecure elections, and there's only one reason for it, and that's to cheat. Professor Nick Giordano, host of the PAS Report. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Be sure to join us tomorrow for the Great America Show, and be sure to join Lou each and every night, 8 p.m. on Frank's Speech, Rumble, Roku, and X for Lou Dobbs Tonight. Thanks, everybody. God bless you, and may God bless America.